Today, mediators working to end the war in Iran say the first round of talks has ended with, quote, encouraging progress. But it comes against the backdrop of fierce criticism on Capitol Hill, even from many Republicans, who are racking up a list of grievances with the president. Key Senate Republicans have bluntly slammed the outline for an Iran deal. Lindsey Graham, over the weekend, called for the president to let Jay Clayton be confirmed as DNI after Trump derailed hearings scheduled last week. And then there is the new condemnation from Senator John Cornyn, who lost his re-election bid to a Trump-backed opponent in Texas. MS Now congressional reporter Michael Chanel has been digging into this divide between Trump and Senate Republicans. Philip is back with me. All right, one Republican senator told you the fraught relationship between Trump and Thune is, quote, awkward for everybody. How so?
Yeah, these tensions between the two men are unmistakable. Now, I spoke to a number of sources for this story who tell me that John Thune and Donald Trump have a functional working relationship. They don't talk every day, quite like Speaker Johnson and President Trump do, but they talk when they need to. But I was also told that oftentimes in private, President Trump will perform what was called a gentle ribbing of John Thune and also ask his allies, how do you think John's doing? What do you think he's doing? Which sources also said is normal, and he does it for a lot of folks. But again, the tensions have been unmistakable. The anti-weaponization fund that President Trump had rolled out, that completely delayed the immigration enforcement bill that Republicans, led by John Thune, were trying to pass. And then there was President Trump's appointment of Bill Pulte to serve as acting director of national intelligence. That thwarted a bipartisan deal to extend the U.S.'s warrantless spying powers, another embarrassment for Thune. And then we saw last week what happened with Jay Clayton, the president saying, actually, don't show up for your confirmation hearing, which, by the way, John Thune was fast-tracking that to try to prevent Bill Pulte from ever taking office. So we had those three things, and this all comes on the backdrop of this Save America Act, which is the voting bill that President Trump has so forcefully been wanting to pass, but it does not have the votes on Capitol Hill. I opened the story with an anecdote about the day that Republicans began debate on that immigration enforcement bill, which, remember, it was delayed because of the anti-weaponization fund. President Trump called up John Thune and demanded that he add this voting bill to the immigration enforcement bill. Well, John Thune said it's already failed once. We don't have the votes for it, but he said as a concession, I will try again. Lindsey Graham drafted that amendment. It went on the floor, and it failed 48-50. But still, to this day, Donald Trump is calling on Senate Republicans to pass this bill, calling on them to abolish the filibuster, even though there's no appetite there. So John Thune and Donald Trump seem to be reading from different songbooks here. And what I heard from a number of Republicans is that they just don't think that Donald Trump understands how the Senate works, understands how Congress works, and it's making it, like that GOP senator had said, awkward for everybody, because when your two leaders are on a different page, the entire groups are on a different page.
So sometimes when I hear a story like this, which I think it could be it could be easy to misinterpret it as palace intrigue, or to misinterpret it as like this week on the Hill, right? Like, it is not a reality show. The reason that the relationship between Senate Republicans and the president matters is, one, if you were actually interested in legislating, which question mark whether or not this president is actually interested in legislating, you would need there to be some type of working relationship in order to maneuver that legislation through. And because the question we have come back to over and over again during the second Trump term is whether or not Senate Republicans in particular would ever stand up to this president and actually act as the check on his power that they are supposed to be. And so to me, this story becomes an early indicator, potentially, of something that could become more substantive in time.
Yeah, but I think the timing is for a reason, right?
You think?
But I mean, it has been clear since he regained the presidency at the beginning of last year that this moment between the primaries and the general election and the midterm year were going to be very dangerous for him, because there were all sorts of incentives for Republicans to go sideways. They don't have to worry about his grip on the Republican Party for the primaries. They do need to worry about their own reelection chances in general. Now, the Senate obviously is different from the House. The Senate, they are not all up for reelection this year. But it is still the case that this was foreseeable, that Donald Trump was going to need to do something to make his troops happy before the midterms. What's fascinating is he's done nothing. He's done nothing to try and do that. He has gone out of his way, in fact, to try and have the heavy hand of, you do what I say because I am the leader. Like, that's continued to be, like, if he tried all these things in January of last year, might have been a very different scenario because they weren't yet dealing with general elections for the midterms. They may very well have understood him to be this, all-powerful figure that he's sort of treated as at the time, but he didn't. And so we're here, and he doesn't get it. I think your comment about how he doesn't know how the Senate works is very, very funny because it's like you just picture him like poring over the power broker and like trying to figure of course he doesn't understand how the Senate works. He barely understands how government works. That's always been his thing. That was his sales pitch. I came from the world of business, and I'm going to come in and knock heads. I remember being at the Iowa State Fair in 2015. The first time he was there, he landed in his helicopter, and I asked him, I was like, how are you going to work with Congress? What's your strategy for that? Because they get to do their own thing. And he said, well, it's the same way I work with the New York City Council to get buildings built. And I was like, no, it's not. And here we are.
I love the idea that if Robert Caro ever wanted to actually keep his attention, he would not have him read Power Broker. Right. He would do a slideshow. Right. 30 seconds before we go. But Mike Johnson, none of this is spilling over to Mike Johnson.
That's because the House hasn't actually been in session since the war in Iran broke out, and these have been some Senate-specific issues. For example, Jay Clayton, a position that had to be confirmed by the Senate, the anti-weaponization fund. That was particularly an acute issue for the Senate because they had what's called a vote-a-rama, which gave Democrats an opportunity to offer amendments on any topic they want. The House returns to session tomorrow, which is going to be a key week for them, as it's their first time back in the halls of the Capitol since the MOU and since there's been this heavy criticism from Republicans. But just one more thing that Phil mentioned, that it seems like the president his timing is really the issue here. I wrote a story on that recently about how Republicans are upset about these ill-timed announcements. Take the context and the substance aside, it's the timing. One House Republican told me it seems like folks at the White House are sitting around a table and trying to figure out when the worst possible time is to announce something, and then they do it. So there are a lot of frustrations on Capitol Hill, both the substance but also the timing of these announcements.
Michael Schnell, what a treat to have you here with us in New York. Thank you so much for being with us. All right.